Welcome to Legal Training for Navy JAG, serving as Special Victim Counsel representing child victims of sexual assault, co-sponsored by the ABA Center for Children and the Law and the ABA Center for Professional Development.
I'd like to turn this over to Julie Kenniston, who is an MSW and LISW. Ms. Kenniston is the former Director of Training and Education at Butler County Children and Youth in Hamilton, Ohio, and she's the Volunteer Executive Director of the Center for Family Solutions. She's also an independent contractor and trainer, presenting nationally and internationally on interviewing, investigation, and prosecution of child abuse cases. She's a trainer for the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention and the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, the National District Attorneys Association, and the Ohio Attorney General sponsored Finding Words Ohio. Ms. Kenniston organized and coordinated the Forensic Training Institute for the Childhood Trust in Cincinnati, Ohio, which started in August 1997, and she has trained on the program since its inception. She is a board member for the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, APSAC. She co-chairing the Forensic Interview Certification Task Force. Ms. Kenniston was a sex abuse investigator for Hamilton County Department of Human Services, where she conducted over 3,000 forensic interviews of alleged child victims of sexual abuse. Ms. Kenniston is the co-author with Ann Graffam Walker, Dr. Walker, and the co-editor with Sally Smolinata from the ABA on the third edition of the Handbook on Questioning Children, a linguistic perspective that's published by the American Bar Association Center on Children and the Law. And with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Julie Kenniston.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Hello, everyone. I get the pleasure of talking with you about the language that you use when you talk with children. So you listen to Dr. Solcini talk with us about the different developmental issues that children bring to the table. And what I want to talk with you about is what you do in terms of language. So here's a visual of the book, and you can certainly access that book through the American Bar Association. It has some very helpful tips on the way that you talk with children, the way that you gather information from them at different levels, preschool, school age, adolescence, individuals with developmental disabilities. So this is an excellent resource for you if you would like something further after we have time today. So the focus that I have is these four things. We're going to look at interview instructions. We're going to look at truth and lie. We're going to focus a little bit on competency, and I'm going to talk with you about a very important research-based approach to gathering information from children called narrative event practice. So let's start with the interview instructions. Any of you who have ever witnessed a forensic interview, particularly if the person conducting the forensic interview was trained in whether it's NICHD, the National Institute for Child Health and Human Development, or any of the other, particularly the 5-day forensic interview models, you've probably seen interviewers use these instructions to lay the foundation for what children should do and in their conversations with adults, and things that will also minimize suggestibility. These questions are correct me, don't know, don't guess, and don't understand. So correct me is all about letting children know that if we as adults make mistakes, we want them to correct us. And if you think back to what Dr. Solcini talked about, that can be very helpful, not only because children at younger ages follow the rules, but also because we want to make sure that we're not putting ideas into children's heads even when we misspeak. So the way that that might sound in a forensic interview would be, so if I said you were 30, I'm sorry about that. If I said you were 30, what would you say? And the child usually, particularly when they're young, will say, I'm not 30, I'm 6. And what we want to do is just reinforce to them that anytime we're speaking, that if we make a mistake, they can correct us. Now, those of you that are parents know that's not typically a parenting rule. We don't sit around the dinner table and say to children, hey, kids, if I tell you that you need to go to bed at 10 o'clock and you don't believe that, you want to correct me, go ahead and do that. So a lot of these instructions are pretty important to undo some of the social norms that occur in the context of parenting and other things. The don't know, don't guess rule is very helpful, particularly for those of you who are working with children and you're trying to figure out what they want. So the don't know, don't guess rule would sound something like this. If I ask you a question and you don't know the answer, I want you to tell me that you don't know. I don't want you to guess. So, for example, if I ask you, what did I have for breakfast this morning? What would you say? And hopefully the child will say that they don't know, and you can follow that up. What I will then say to the child is, if you do know the answer, I want you to tell me. So if I ask you, what did you have for breakfast this morning? What would you say? And then hopefully the child will answer those questions. The don't know, don't guess rule is extremely important when you are trying to get at a child's knowledge of an event, but also in the context of the work that you do, that they're not just providing answers if they truly don't know how they feel about it. The I don't understand rule is very important because we as adults often use big words with children, even if they're not long and have a lot of letters in them. Sometimes they're abstract words, the things that Dr. Solcini referenced. Words like court to a child isn't typically the inside of a room where people are making decisions. It's more like a basketball court or a tennis court or something like that. So the don't understand rule is really prompting children when they have questions about or they're confused about the things that they say. It empowers them to tell us that they don't understand. So what I might say to a child is, if I asked you, what is your patella, what would you say? And if the child says, I don't understand what you're talking about, or I don't know what you mean, then we can say, well, your patella is your knee, and so what I'll do is change it in, words that make more sense. So those instructions, the reason why this slide says interview instructions cross over is that those instructions are really important for people that do forensic interviews, those that are gathering information for the court, but they're equally as important in the court system. So whether it's a child testifying or whether it's you representing a child, empowering them to give you accurate information can be very, very helpful. In the truth-lie research, which is another instruction that often goes along with forensic interviews, and I understand that this may not be really the role that all of you carry, but important nonetheless to the work that we do. In the most current research, it really shows that eliciting the promise to tell the truth has more impact than some of the ways that we might have done truth-lie discussions in the past. So if I said that my shirt was red, is that the truth or is that a lie when I'm actually wearing a black shirt? We learned over the course of many years that doing something concrete, because we know children are concrete, particularly young ones, doing something concrete for that demonstration can be very helpful. And so many of us have used those demonstrations for years and years. What we know now is that it's probably more important for us to say to children, do you promise that you will tell the truth today, and get them to make that promise or for us to elicit that promise. That's actually what gets us more accuracy and commits the child to the truth-telling itself. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about competency and what competency is all about. Now, I'm going to focus on competency in terms of a witness, a child witness. But what I also then want to talk with you about is how you can look at competency when you're trying to figure out what children want and some of the decisions that they're making. When we look at court competency, there are 4 elements to that. One is the ability to recollect and recall. And thinking through what that means, what we're saying is that regardless of age, thinking through what Dr. Solcini said, regardless of age, children really pretty early have the ability to put words together to talk about events that they experience. So in our talking with them, we want to give them that ability. And thinking about how we as adults often talk with one another, it's how are you, what have you been doing? If I want to find out about one of you and what you're doing in your job, I might say, how long have you been doing this work? Where have you been? Have you always practiced in this city? And so as adults, we're very, very used to asking closed-ended questions. And as adults, closed-ended questions can prompt more information if I, as an adult, think you want more information. So you might say to me, so Julie, where do you practice? And I tell you just north of Cincinnati, and that's it. It's a closed-ended question. I give you limited information in my response. But if I know that really your question is asking, have you practiced other places or something to that effect, I might give you more information because as an adult, I can process that your very closed-ended question was really seeking more. Children don't tend to do that. So in the techniques that I talk with you about in just a little bit, I want to talk with you about how you can increase the amount of information we get from children because they don't necessarily get those social conversational cues to give more information. So this ability to recollect and recall an event and then to speak to that is really, really important. The ability to perceive accurately is also very important. So we heard Dr. Solcini talk about fantasy and the child riding the moose in the backyard, even though there are no moose in Seattle, but really thinking through of the information that children give us, is it accurate? Is it coming from a place of fact? Is it something that we can rely on in order to make our case decisions? The ability to differentiate truth from lies and demonstrate this knowledge, and to show that in this case, a child knows what happens if a lie is told. That's where a lot of our old truth-lie demonstrations or truth-lie discussions used to occur in forensic interviews. If I said that my shirt is red, is that the truth or is that a lie when I'm wearing a black shirt? If I said I'm wearing a watch, is that the truth or is that a lie when I'm actually wearing a watch? Doing those demonstrations, we did that very much to show that children were competent, when in reality, knowing now what we know, we really just want to get them to promise to tell the truth. And we've already spoken to that. So this final piece is the ability to speak from personal knowledge of the facts. As a witness who's testified in court, I know that unless I'm an expert witness, I am really only supposed to talk about things that I experience, things that I see with my own eyes, hear with my own ears, or feel with my own body. And that's something then when you combine the recollect and recall and speaking from personal knowledge of the facts, that can really help us in demonstrating whether or not a child witness is competent in terms of court processes. Now, I want to take a minute just to talk about competency and the work that all of you do and think through, how do you know when a child really understands their situation and can give feedback to you about where they might want to go? And I think as I kind of have thought through this concept to really choose some of the pieces that we might want to discuss this morning, or for me this morning, for many of you not, is this idea of first understanding what a child's ability to discuss information that they recollect and recall or information they experience, to think about that ability, and then also to understand from this developmental perspective that Dr. Fulcini talked about is children and what they rely upon. So when you're thinking about competence and in a child, what do they want in a certain situation, where do they want to be, or as a victim of something, what would they prefer to happen? Really combining these concepts of the psychological and the affective and the emotional, along with what they're able to do, what they're able to tell you, is hugely important, because they might be able to tell you and be a very competent witness in court, but what they choose to tell you is going to rely on maybe emotionally what they need at that developmental stage, or cognitively what they understand to be true, or perhaps the stress reaction, because all of these separations are so difficult for them that even though they have a sense that it wouldn't be good to be with a parent or to be around a certain person, that they would prefer not to have that level of stress. So combining those two things, I think, is very, very important. Let's talk about a practice that it has become really the premier approach in all of the forensic interview models, at least that are presented nationally in the U.S. And this concept is called narrative event practice. It's called other things as well. It's called episodic memory training or episodic practice. But the focus here is that we're trying to get children to talk more fully or in lengthy sentences to the best of their ability, not just answering one or two word, giving one or two word responses to our questions. Narrative event practice demonstrates three of the elements of competency, because what it does, if we go back here, is it's going to help a child, and it's going to demonstrate that a child can recollect and recall an event. It can give us some indication on whether or not they're perceiving things accurately, and it's going to show them that they're speaking from personal knowledge of the facts. Let me explain to you what narrative event practice is. The idea behind narrative event practice is that you as the adult will ask the child to think through or to talk through an event that he or she has experienced and give you details around that event. So what we do then is we're undoing current communication culture, this idea that we sit at the dinner table and say to our children, how was your day? Fine. Do you have any homework? No. What did you do today? Nothing. And so at our dinner table or at wherever it is that we might connect with our children about their day, we as adults ask these very closed-ended questions, and we get these one-word responses. And in this little dialogue that I just shared with you, it's not even an accurate response. The child actually does have things that he or she did during the day. So when we ask, what did you do today, and the child says nothing, it's not even an accurate response. So this narrative event practice teaches children how to communicate. And it really, for our purposes in the legal system, it really makes the child the expert instead of us having to guess what it is that they know or what it is that they have to share. So how do we do narrative event practice? The first thing that we're going to do is pick a neutral event. The key to narrative event practice is that it's neutral and non-abusive. Many of you are going to be talking to children about traumas that they experience or the ways that they feel about things that are very difficult in their lives. And so to do this narrative event practice, we want to pick something that's neutral and non-abusive, something that's easy and has very, very little risk for them to talk about. We want the child to tell us everything about that event and not interrupt. We want to allow for pauses when we talk to children. And so let me give you an example of this, and then we'll talk about where we go from here. What I might do with a child is say, so tell me about something that you really like to do. And if the child says, I love playing hockey, I will then focus the child on one time that the child played hockey, because I want them thinking of one individual account, not the routine or what usually happened, but one individual account of playing hockey. So I might say, so I want you to think about the last time that you played hockey, and I want you to tell me everything about playing hockey the last time. I might add, if the child is older, from the beginning through the middle to the end, even the little things that you don't think are important. And by not allowing or not interrupting and allowing for pauses, the child gives me often lengthy responses. Now, this is either in a sentence or maybe in paragraphs. And what I want to do then as the adult is follow up with narrative inviting questions. We're not what you wear when you play hockey. That wouldn't be narrative inviting. And not to say, who are you with when you play hockey, but to say, I heard you say that you played goalie. Tell me all about playing goalie. Or I heard you say that you went to the hockey rink. Tell me all about the hockey rink. The idea is that we're really pushing for more narrative, showing that we can be a very good listener and give information or get more information from this child from the child's perspective. What can be very helpful, particularly with young children, is that we focus on actions or the things that the child did, the verbs, what did they do during this event of playing hockey or whatever it is, whatever the event is that we're discussing with the child. And we're listening to the child's ability to describe and give these activities in a logical sequence. So what this does for you as the representative of the child or thinking through what the child might be able to do, it gives you a sense of what the child perceives, how they can tell an event. And when you start to inquire from the child what they want as a victim or what the child really would like to do in certain situations, you'll have a baseline from something that wasn't really risky to talk about. You're not really looking at some of the impact of trauma necessarily on how they tell you. The impact of trauma might come out in the way that they tell or maybe memory issues, but not necessarily in just the way that they talk. So this narrative event practice gives you a baseline for the child's abilities. Let's look at some of the benefits of narrative event practice. So as the interviewer, and when I say interviewer, I'm really talking about you, the person that's speaking with the child. As the interviewer, you're engaging the child. You are showing the child that you are a listener and that you're paying attention. And in your work, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to figure out what it is that the child wants or needs, how you can represent the child the best way possible. Like I stated before, you're getting a baseline of the child's ability and willingness to communicate with you. And those two things are hugely important. They're very different, but they're very important. If you're interviewing a 3 or a 4-year-old, for example, you want to get an idea of how well they can communicate. And this has very little to do with competence just as a topic, but just in terms of their ability to talk. Can they even talk to you? Are they able to use words? And then taking it that next step further on their competence to give you information, the information that you're seeking in your representation of the child. And then their willingness to communicate, particularly with children that for whatever reason, one reason or another, maybe because of trauma, maybe because of relationship, they're choosing not to share information with you. So ability is one thing, but willingness is another. And this narrative event practice gives you a baseline of both of these things in talking with about a neutral, non-abusive event. The interviewer explains and practices with the child the way that information will be shared. We really want to hear things from the child. The child is the expert on the child's life. We are not the experts on children's lives that we're serving. We want that information from them. And inherent in that concept is where you get this idea of whether or not the child is competent. The interviewer shows interest and doesn't interrupt. I referenced that in an earlier slide, but this is one of the benefits. The interviewer demonstrates that there will be follow-up questions, even when the child provides a lot of information. And this, I think, is absolutely crucial because we very often shut children down when they have much, much more to give us. They're processing information at their developmental level, and we want to get out of the way. We want to understand what it is that they're processing. The interviewer shows that the child is an expert on his own life details by allowing the child to tell what he knows in his own words. This one is directly related to that fourth issue of competency, this personal knowledge and facts. We're allowing the child to talk about a life experience. We're getting out of the way. We're hearing it in the child's words, and we get a better sense of what the child's understanding is of the event. The interviewer demonstrates that the child can recollect and recall. So by getting the child to focus on an event that is typically fact-based, child playing hockey, that information then gives us a sense of whether or not they can recollect and recall an event. The interviewer gets a sense of the child's perception of the event and ability to observe. So this is where, as the representative of the child, you want to understand what it's like for the child living in a home environment or as a victim of one thing or another. So this narrative event practice gives you an immense amount of information, not just whether or not a child can be a competent witness, but what the competence of the child is when you're looking at gathering information and trying to make decisions. The interviewer receives data that is unsolicited. This is probably one of my favorite parts. The details that I get from children when I ask these types of questions and get out of the way so that they can just talk freely, the amount of information that you get that you do not in any way indicate or suggest to the child really shows that what is being stated from the child is not highly led or suggestive. The interviewer gets information that can be corroborated by the multidisciplinary team. That's what MDT stands for. And so for me, for doing forensic interviews, this is hugely important in understanding what's occurring in cases because we don't ever get all of the information in an investigation solely from the child. We get information from caregivers. We get information from suspects. We get information from others that are in the child's life, witnesses and people that the child has disclosed to. So the information from the child interview can be corroborated outside of that forensic interview. And the interviewer can refer to the narrative event practice later in the interview when the child's answering in fewer words. So often what I'll say to the child is, I want you to tell me all about what happened at your mom's house, just like you told me about that last hockey game you played. Or if I've asked the child maybe to do a narrative event practice on their morning, think about your morning and tell me all about your morning from waking up to going to school, and they've narrated through their morning. Later in the interview, when I'm talking to them about other things that maybe are abusive or traumatic in nature, I'll say, think about whatever time it is I'm focusing on and tell me all about it, just like you told me about your morning. So where I want to now just focus the last few minutes that we have together is this idea. I want to expound on this idea of concrete versus abstract thinking and why this is crucial for court personnel. Dr. Spolcini talked about how younger children are concrete, and she talked about how they begin processing pretty early some ideas and incorporating ideas into the way that they view the world. And so as we think about it, concrete things are things that are very literal. They're things that you can touch or experience or engage with. And so in this list of who, what, where, when, how long, how many times, and why, if you think about a who question, a who is a person, and a person is someone that you can touch or engage with. So a who question is concrete because it's literal. You can touch a person. What is also concrete because it could be a table, or what could be a what happened. He kicked me, or what. Those things are things that are interactions or things that you can touch and experience. They're literal. So who and what are concrete questions. Where is also a concrete question. A location is concrete. You can touch a room. You can touch the inside of a car. And so of the who, what, where, when, how long, how many, and why, who, what, and where are the concrete questions. You can't touch a when. You can't touch August 8th or yesterday. You can't engage with that. It's not literal. It's abstract. It requires a certain amount of cognitive processing to understand that concept. And the same goes for how long, 12 minutes, or 2 years. Those things are not things that you can touch or engage with, so they're abstract. How many times? 12. That's not something that you can reach out and touch or engage with. It's not literal. And then why? This idea of cause and effect. You heard Dr. Spoltini talking about children very, very early beginning cause and effect, but in a very concrete way. If I giggle, then my mommy will smile, those kind of things. Those are two very concrete things, but they're just starting to think through the very basics of cause and effect. Why is also abstract because why very often comes across as a child trying to take the perspective of someone else. Why did your mom come into the bedroom? Or why did your dad hit you? And that's a very abstract thing. A child who we've heard throughout our presentation here today, very egocentric, focused on themselves. They're the center of attention. Very difficult to take somebody else's perspective. So in this question strategy of who, what, where, when, how long, how many times, and why, if children are concrete, and you heard that many of the children, based on development, are concrete, we want to focus our question strategies on the who, the what, and the where of the event, and to really try to steer clear of the when, the how long, the how many times, and the why. We can get that information, we can get that data by getting concrete information about the who, the what, and the where. So let me give you an example of this. If I am interviewing a child and she tells me that some type of abuse has occurred in her home, and I ask her to tell me all about the abuse, I want you to think about the last time and tell me all about it, from the beginning through the middle to the end. And she tells me that she was playing in her bedroom and they were playing with her new video game that she has. And her cousin Juan had come from California and they were spending time together playing the video game. And her father came into the room and told her that she needed to turn it off and it was time or she was going to be in trouble. And she and Juan continued to play the video game, and the father came in and grabbed her by her arm and threw her down away from the video game and hit her with a belt. If you say to that child, when did that happen, it would be very difficult for the child to put all those pieces together. That's an abstract thought. But as the interviewer, you receive that information. You know who was there. You know it was around Christmas. You know that it was after receiving the video game, so you can pinpoint what Christmas by perhaps asking an adult. You can find out when Juan, the cousin, came from California. You can even corroborate perhaps tickets or other things that will give you the when information. So the key here when we're looking at gathering information from children is to get them talking as much as possible and to really allow them to focus on what it is that they've mastered, the concrete concepts in our language, the who, the what, and the where. And my hope for you then is that this will assist you as you're gathering information, using this narrative event practice, getting children talking. It will not only give you information to help you understand better what has happened for children, what they've experienced, but also what their desires would be as victims of abuse or witnesses of abuse, and some of the things that that maybe they would like to see happen and whether or not you feel like they're competent to give you that information. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Anne-Marie.